You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast, where we cover all things technical related to vertebrate pest management. Hey, glad to have you on board. Hope your week went well. We are, I'm trying to get as many podcasts out ahead of me as possible as we're moving into, of course, the travel season for me. And so, of course, springtime can bring its own challenges as well. So anyways, I hope you're enjoying these podcasts. But in any event, if you have comments, thoughts, questions, yes, even criticisms, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. And we can certainly talk about whatever your issues are. Nevertheless, I just wanted to spotlight my website again. We have various publications there for training purposes as well as some equipment. But we also have things like working on organizing your images, for example, also putting in watermarks, that sort of thing, if you're looking for that sort of issue for your particular photographs as well. But a lot of guys have a lot of photographs, but they're not organized and they can't find anything. So that certainly can be a challenge, and I understand that. So you may want to reach out to me and have me organize your photos for you. But in any event, we also have work that we help people with their PowerPoints, making sure that they're following good practice when it comes to adult education. So again, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. All right. Well, what are we going to talk about this week? Well, I have been doing some work in the area of moles, and I thought it would be kind of neat to do something on some of the biology of moles, because there isn't a lot known by some of them, and certainly going to be less amongst our wildlife control professional community. So I thought I would bring this up, and we're going to talk a little bit about the biology of star-nosed moles. And so if you're not familiar with those moles, this will be an opportunity for you to become aware. They're not nationwide, so they're not throughout the entire United States. Of course, moles don't occur everywhere. For example, in my state of Montana, we don't have moles. And I fortunately had the privilege of trapping one star-nosed mole back in Massachusetts. That was, of course, before they banned our trapping equipment, and the great wisdom of the citizens of Massachusetts. Of course, I'm being sarcastic there. But nevertheless, I guess the people of Massachusetts wanted people to use poison instead of traps for some reason. But I doubt they really thought about it all that deeply. Nevertheless, I had the ability to trap one, and I was quite surprised when I caught it, because I wasn't even sure if I knew anything about star-nosed moles. So hopefully I can help you get past that particular ignorance on my part through this presentation today. So why don't we get started? Well, first of all, recognize there's the scientific name of the star-nosed mole, Condylura cristata, and it only occurs in the northeast region of the United States, but also goes well up into Canada, the eastern provinces, out into Quebec and Ontario and parts of Newfoundland. Of course, the Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, the Maritime provinces as well. It goes as far west as parts of Minnesota, and as far south as down into North Carolina, a little bit of South Carolina, and then the upper end of Georgia. So it's got a pretty big range, not as large, of course, as the eastern mole, which most people are more familiar with. And also the star-nosed moles, even though it has a fairly wide range geographically, habitat-wise, its range is significantly smaller than the eastern mole. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Well, we've already seen that the scientific name is Condylura cristata, but have you ever thought about what the meaning of that is? And it's one of the things I think it's important as professionals is you just sort of understand where some of these terms come from. Yeah, is it going to make you more money? No, but there are some things you need to just know just being a professional, right? And so you want to broaden your knowledge. Not everything is always about money. One of the arguments, of course, that I've made is, if your doctor came to you and said, well, I know you have pain in your thingamabob, and we're going to go take care of that, would you want to stay with that doctor? Well, why? Well, does he really need to know what the thingamabob is? Technically, or do you just need him to fix it, right? So this is where we kind of sell ourselves short in terms of our professionalism, right? So sometimes people don't respect the vertebrate pest world because we don't make them respect us, right? And so that's just something I'll leave to you to think about. But anyways, its scientific name, the first part, Condylura, comes from two Greek roots. Of course, a lot of scientists would name things based on the Greek language, right? So condyl means knobby, and the ura means tail. It was obviously, when you look at the, the star-nosed mole, its tail is not knobby at all. So there was obviously a mistaken identification there. Nevertheless, the name stuck, and then crista comes from the Latin word tuft or crest, and that's referring to the star at the front of the animal's nose. Now, keep in mind that when we're dealing with these moles, that the males and females are about the same size. Now, a lot of different species of animals, the male can be larger, sometimes the female is larger, and sometimes the differences can be quite noticeable. Other times the differences are not quite noticeable, but they still exist because they may only be a relatively small percentage difference. But for this particular species, male and female are going to be about the same size. So their total length, again, that's from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail, the bony part of the tail, not the fur, be about 7 inches. Okay, so pretty good length, and then of course their weight may be up to 2 ounces. So they're not that large. And what's interesting is that their tail is almost the length of their body. Right, so not quite, but substantially so. So it comes pretty close. And then, of course, they have carnivorous type teeth. So it's not like a rodent, where rodents have paired incisors. With moles, of course, they have carnivore type teeth because they're predators, right? They're eating a lot of invertebrates. So something to keep in mind there. And if you ever get a chance, always rub, once you know the animal's dead, right? Don't do it while they're alive. Try to stroke the fur, and you'll notice the fur goes in either direction without resistance, right? If you try that with your cat, you'll know that the fur lays in one particular direction, right? Head to tail. Or with a mole, it's more vertical, and it just simply flows whichever way you're pushing it, right? So that's kind of an interesting fact. Now, in terms of the star-nosed mole's anatomy, that's its physical features, right? It has those, when you see that nose, and it can be kind of shocking when you first see it, it has 22 tentacles, and those are actually ways that allows the mole to feel for prey when it's hunting, right? And so there's been a fair amount of research on the neurology of these types of things in their head, right? So this is something for you to be. It's kind of interesting. I didn't take a deep dive in it because it gets pretty technical, and that's really not going to be that relevant for your trapping work per se or your control work for these creatures. But nevertheless, it is fascinating to see scientists put a fair amount of work into understanding how those tentacles work as they're looking for worms and insects and other types of things. We'll talk about its diet here shortly. And then, of course, its behavior. Interestingly enough, this animal can be found above snow, but they're superb divers, right? So this is the most aquatic of the moles that we have in the United States. So we have 7 species of moles that occur within the United States. And so this one really can do well in wet and semi-wet environments, and so it'll actually swim in finding prey. Other moles really don't do that. That's not to say other moles can't swim. They can. It's just a matter of that this mole seems to actually hunt during this swimming activity, right? And so it also can be in semi-wet soils. So it can be more in a swampier area well-watered area as opposed to the eastern mole, which tends to like well-drained soils. So that's a habitat difference. That's why I said even though the range of a star-nosed mole is quite large geographically, when you actually think about the areas where they can be found, it's very narrow because they need to be near water. And so they like that. So an interesting point about them is that they can maintain their body temperature even when they're swimming in freezing water. Right? So as you know, if water's moving, it can be colder than freezing, right? And so they're able to maintain their body temperature, so that which is an incredible thing for them to be able to do. On the same token, they are more sensitive. They're more sensitive to loss of oxygen than other types of species. Now, you may not know, but our air in the environment is about 21% oxygen, where that they will die in atmospheres would have 6% or less oxygen. And so that may not mean much to you, but that came as a shock to the researchers who actually thought that being a below ground animal, also being able to swim for extended period of times, that it would actually be able to tolerate higher carbon dioxide levels. And the answer to there is that no, they're actually rather sensitive to that. So that was kind of a shock to the researchers when they were looking into this. And then lastly, we're getting into their habitat, of course. I already mentioned that they like to be found in wet soils adjacent to streams. And then their burrow size, interestingly enough, is anywhere 1 to 3 inches in width, right? So if you dug down into one of their burrow systems, that kind of gives you an idea of how large or small their burrow system is. But notice the depth. That can be anywhere from a little over an inch below the ground to almost 2 feet below the ground, which of course in some areas that would be below the frost line. So they can get down there in a ways, to be sure. In terms of their nesting, females will nest, of course, when they're in swampy areas. They're not going to raise their young underwater, right? So that's not going to work. So they will actually be in a sort of a mound in an area above the water line, and their nest consists typically of grass and dry leaves and straw in an area that's going to be dry for their young. They only have 1 litter a year, 4 to 6 young per litter, and they can birth anywhere on average. Again, there's going to be some variation anywhere between May and June. So that's something for you to think about as well. What do they eat? Well, they eat non-vertebrates or invertebrates, right? So that would include small crustaceans, and there you can see some of the scientific names for them. And then ditiscid larvae, and that is predaceous diving beetles. So this is where they're hunting in the water, right? So these are beetles that they will go into the water to hunt. Other research is found. Research was done out of Ithaca, New York. If you want to look that up, it's kind of about midway up the width of the state. The researchers found they're doing stomach analysis. This is where they would capture a bunch of these star-nosed moles and then open up their stomachs and to try to determine what they were eating, right? And so what they found was 80% of their food that was in their stomach, right, was of aquatic origin. So they're really spend a lot of time in and around the water. And so 50% was annelids, and these are soft-bodied worms, not necessarily earthworms, which was kind of a little bit of a surprise to me. And then, of course, leeches, which, of course, is a very aquatic insect, of course. Of invertebrate, I should say. And then, of course, in terms of insects, a third of their stomach volume was insects. So they're kind of doing a lot of things in the water, and but don't avoid the soil. Of course, you're not really going to trap them, but maybe one of you out there might be able to come up with a trap to catch star-nosed moles in the water. That might be an idea for you, and hopefully this information will help you along that particular way. Another study done in the state of Georgia, just to kind of give you a little bit of geographical distance here. Again, annelids are those soft-bodied worms, of course, and then they found almost half of the diet was these worms, not necessarily earthworms, right? It's broader category than that. And then, of course, insects, almost about a third of their diet. And then they started getting down into some other extraneous matter. I don't think this is going to add up completely to 100%. I wanted to give you the kind of the big picture, not get it down to, half of a percent and this sort of thing. But it's going to be pretty close, right? So extraneous matter, they couldn't really identify it probably, 8%. Crustaceans, of course, is 6.5%. And then mollusks, these are clamshells, that's 2.2%, which is kind of unusual. And then, of course, vertebrates, yes, they will prey on vertebrates. I would suspect things like maybe fish would be among that particular element, and that's 2.2% as well. So generally, you're not going to go too far wrong by just saying, worms and, of course, insects. That's going to be the majority of the diet, over 80%, and then it goes down. It goes down from there. Well, I hope you found that interesting about this rather remarkable semi-aquatic creature. In other words, it's not full aquatic. It's not a fish, right? It's not living in the water, but it spends a great deal of time in and around the water. And so it's just something for you to think about when you are working in that particular area. If people are complaining about mounds and it's really wet, you might want to be thinking that you're dealing with a star-nosed mole as opposed to an eastern mole, or maybe the long-tail, broad-tailed mole, or the long-tailed mole. I'm trying to think of the right word here. I'm missing the right term I need for that other mole. But nevertheless, the star-nosed mole is certainly around. Those of you out in the Northeast, up into Canada, yes, even to our provinces of eastern Canada, you have the star-nosed mole as well. Of course, there's a lot more water up there in Canada than what we have in the U.S., so it's certainly something to think about and learn more about this remarkable creature that invades certainly lawns. Well, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You've been listening to the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast. Hope you take a few moments to subscribe to the channel. If you have thoughts, comments, suggestions for new shows, perhaps even a suggestion for someone to be a guest on the show, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me, of course, at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Well, until next time, take care, everybody.
This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast. Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and/or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.